we'll have a really nice review of exactly where we are, as well as just kind of some current changes from the U.S. Treasury. And then our primary decisions today will all just be related to contracts that have already been extended, that have already been awarded. And we've had some folks request for date extensions. We've had a request for a change in scope. And then we just have one that's a little bit unique with a change in spending that's different than what we normally see. So we'll go through all of those. We do have something this committee actually hasn't had yet, is the availability of public comment. So all public meetings now can have a public comment period. But I don't believe we've had anybody sign up, so we don't have that on our agenda. So we'll go right into a review of our previously allocated awards and the expenses to date. And that is the first spreadsheet that I sent you. If anybody wants to look at hard copy, this is the hard copy that Wade had made for us. And I'm not going to go line item by line item, but I know that y'all may want to go through. And so let me just kind of give you a refresher of how we've been organizing this review, because this is what Wade looks at every quarter, sometimes more often than quarterly, but this is the report that we run when we file the report with the U.S. Treasury. So what you have, and the gray bar lines correlate to the resolution. So you see RS 221558, that's 2022. So we just cut off the first two numbers. So when you say RS 21, that's 21. And then the last four digits are the resolution number. And so everything that we have, the way we're tracking all of the American Rescue Plan awards is by the resolution. And then you see the total amount, the very first column, so the column to your left of numbers is the amount that was awarded. And then you have the amount that was spent this period and the total to date. Encumbrances, in our government world could be a purchase order or some other request to spend that actually hasn't been processed as a payment then. So just think of that as a purchase order for something that they've purchased and we just haven't paid the invoice yet. So it's an expense incurred.
Can we define the period? When it says period actual amount, what is that period? Is it January?
It would be quarterly.
So first quarter of this year?
Fourth quarter. This is through 12/31.
Through 12/31.
Yeah, this is through 12/31/23. And so, excuse me. So if there was spending in the fourth quarter of calendar 23, you're going to see that in that period column. And so then you have the inception to date, and then you have what's left over. And so we go through this to look at money's been awarded, but if they're not spending it, why? And we'll call and find out what the time frame is. Do they think they're going to spend the money by the time they were allotted? And you can see there's internal. So a lot of them, if they're administrative, those would be contracts with nonprofits in many cases. But then you'll also see the different departments. And I'll show you one where it's the most, it's page 3, so it's about halfway down. It was the Emergency Response Fund. So the gray bar total is $2 million. It's R211206, and it's $2 million. We've spent 1.7 million of that, but we didn't break that 2 million out by department. So that's why you have all these line items in here, and all the line items on the right look negative, like they've overspent. It's because we didn't assign the $2 million to every department, because we didn't know which departments would necessarily need it. So that's where, if you're looking online, you'll see you have a bunch of red numbers. It will look like it was overspent, but just look at the gray total, and you can see 2 million awarded, 1.7 million spent to date, 284,802 left to spend. So that's how this report works. If you're looking at some of the totals, if you have any red negatives, look at the total line item, because it just means there were some different departments spending within that award.
Are they gonna send us the breakdown of each department for that one?
This is the breakdown.
But you're saying that we don't know how much each,
We know how much each department spent,
okay.
but
But I
we
wanna know
didn't-
what they spent it on.
Oh, well, we'd have to get to invoice level for that. I mean, and we can if you have questions, but it's not a report. You don't want us to print that entire report
Yeah,
to bring in
okay,
here. It's
but
just-
I think that's important to, even if it's broken out into major categories, like I don't need to see, but I think it's important for people to know what our departments are spending this money on.
It's all within the system, so you can absolutely ask for any of it, or if there's a specific invoice or anything that you want pulled. We just won't run a report. I mean, we can run a report on every single line of detail.
Okay.
We just don't make this report that long.
Right.
So,
So is
Go ahead.
that report emailable, or is the file too large for that as well?
I don't know
Just-
that you would run it for everything, or would you run it by individual BU? I would probably say you pick the BUs.
Yeah, we could probably merge some BUs together. It definitely could be emailable, depending on what we did with the file. It just might be broken out in a few files.
Right. And some of them, so it just kind of depends, like, I'm just looking at the first page, the $15 million that's at MDHA, you know, they've spent $1 million. You know, there are lots of invoices that go behind that versus, like on, the next line item, the Legal Aid Society and the eviction prevention program, like those are lump sums that we've sent to them.
Right.
So those, we don't have the invoices in the system behind that number. That's actually so for nonprofits, the expenditures are how much we've sent to them.
Right.
Versus if it's an internal department, it would be how much they've charged to it. So,
Is it,
But
sorry, go ahead.
one more question. Are they submitting some kind of quarterly or every 6-month kind of update around what this money reflects and how many people have been?
yes, so they send quarterly reports of their grant spending plan, so we see how much has been spent compared to what they thought, and then we also get a projection for what they need for the next quarter to 6 months. And then they also send in like a verbal report, or I say verbal, they send in a written report, the verbiage to explain where they are in the program, how many individuals served, or whatever their, their program updates that they're tracking.
When would we get those reports?
We can give them all to you.
Because I would like to see them. I'm trying to remember when we allocated some of this money, right? So you bring a MDHA and they have 15 and they've only spent 1 million. I'm trying to recall when it was we gave it to them and why it's only been this much. And so it would be helpful to
So we
see
get,
some of that.
we get all of those, they're all saved, we get, I say quarterly, but I forget that that's over 2 years, so they're really every 6 months, is that right?
Yep. 6 month updates.
And so, and Wade goes through those with the departments, so, not to put Wade on the spot, but she may actually be able to answer a lot of questions here if you have them right now, and if we don't know them, we'll just have to track to the departments. But there are several where there's not spending, and we'll ask, and they say, well, we're not gonna start spending until April of '24. Like, oh, okay. So we know we're not gonna see anything in the next quarter come through. So there's, I mean, every one seems to be slightly different.
Question. When we get into the organizations that have asked for extensions, can we see their reports to see what they have spent and how much is left, and maybe even get a summary, few sentences of what the outcome is for that extension before we consider it?
Yeah, I think Wade will be able to pull up anything that we need
Okay.
for those. So this is what we use. I guess I'll just, if you want to look at the bottom line, we've allocated 255.8 million of the 259.8 million. So we have roughly 4 million that hasn't been allocated yet. Of those funds, 98 million have been spent. So there's still obviously quite a bit outstanding. And we just continue to track, will it be spent within the time frame? And we'll talk more about the importance of that from an obligation perspective and the definition of obligation. That's probably the biggest piece that we're running up against. And we'll get it when we start talking about the contracts with the nonprofits. There's actually probably less of a concern with those contracts as long as we know they'll be fully spent. That's always the big if, right? So those contracts could extend past the obligation date as long as we know no funds are coming back to us. So internally then we'll talk about the change in definition. So I give you as much time as you want here with this today, or if it's just, you'd rather have a chance to look back through it and then just send questions, a combination of both. Yeah.
One more question. You mentioned that some organizations have asked for extensions. Have any indicated that they will be returning funds?
I don't know, any of the nonprofits haven't. We've got a little bit internally with a couple of the awards where they thought they could use it right away, and then now that it's almost like that time frame passed, they don't need to hire that manager anymore. So there are some internal funds.
You have a gauge about how much you think would come from that kind of return?
I
It's
think
not a big number, I'm guessing.
we've been tracking, is it on that?
It is.
I'm gonna ask Wade to pull it up. But we'll have that pulled up in a second. Did you have a question?
Oh, I wanna see the reports of number of people who have been helped, demographics, zip codes, and all of that.
We could probably send the most recent for each one, because they're all cumulative, correct? So that would be, well, the nonprofit contracts that were specifically awarded by this committee, there's a dozen or so. Does that sound about right? I'm looking
Yeah,
at
that are
the agenda.
ongoing.
Yeah, is it about a dozen-ish?
It's about 7 or 8.
So we'll just send
You
the
have-
most recent report for each of those.
So return funds, we have about 500,000 expected.
Okay.
Is anybody else alarmed at, a lot of these resolutions were in 2021, we're now in 2024, and there's so much of these unspent funds, like a lot. So this to me, this is bothersome, because boy, when we had that money, everybody was running. They were beating down the door, it was like Black Friday at the Walmart. And so we've allocated all these dollars, and sometimes zero of it has been spent, and yet we're not concerned, because it has to be allocated by what date?
So it has to be obligated by 12/31/24.
Yeah. And it has to be spent by 12/31/26. So we have to figure out by the end of this year if we're going to reallocate these dollars, because if not, we just have to hope and pray that they spend that money, otherwise we lost it. They will
So,
claw it back.
and what I think
And I say they, 'cause so people that are watching at home, they is the federal government, not Metro clawing it
Right.
back. We've lost control of it after 12/31/24.
And what I will recommend to the committee is that we do something similar that we did with the CARES Act, with a slightly, so if you remember, and it was for a totally different reason, but with the CARES Act, they originally had an expiration date of 12/30/2020. And we were like, we're not finished with this pandemic, and we have funds left that we are gonna need to spend after that date. And they, so on December 15th of 2020, at the council meeting, we said, all funds available now, which we estimate to be X, will be spent on, at that time, we chose public safety salaries. we then used that X savings to spend in the future. We will probably have to do something very similar.
But not at the scale of what we're looking at here. Like, that's absolutely ridiculous.
No, because we have a much better idea of what will actually be spent. And we continue to monitor that, and we can start to handpick some of these to go through as a committee.
Like,
But yes,
What in particular, if you all could say in particular, I've noticed some that are two-year grants, but they have been spending, but it's a 2-year grant, so they have some left. But then, to the example of MDHA, I mean, it doesn't look like they've done much of anything, but with that, it was for affordable housing, so I would.
But it's also for wraparound services, 1.6 million for wraparound services, that 0 of those dollars have been spent, and it was allocated in 2021. Wraparound services is something that is unbelievably important.
That wasn't to MDHA though, that was to
Oh,
the
no,
housing.
yes, MDHA, 2020, I'm sorry, it was 2022, Resolution 1696. We allocated $1.6 million to MDHA wraparound services, and $0 have been spent to date. It's on page 2, right in the middle. $5 million in MDHA Envision Casey. Now, I think those were for capital things, so they may have a point in time in the future that they're doing whatever, so I get those types of things, but
Yeah.
and same thing with 50 Forward Bordeaux, because I think we were building something or helping to build 2.5 and 625, 2.5 million and 625,000.
that one was more recent, wasn't it?
It was-
The last ones that we did.
So like Nashville State also, where
Yeah.
the workforce.
Which, yeah, I get that. And then the mayor's office participatory, I get that, we're in the process of that. The affordable housing, I sort of get, age in place, $8 million, that was in 2022. And out of $8 million, 192,000 has been spent on aging in place. And I personally have people in my district that are struggling and being run out of the house that they've been renting for 15 years because they can no longer afford it anymore. We're talking about aging in place. Innovative Housing Solutions, again, this is, I guess, the Planning Commission, $7 million, but that was in 2022, $0 have been spent. I mean, you can go down. General services, all these upgrades that we talked about, the library, the sheriff, all that stuff.
For all of those, can we have the rationale and then their projected timeline? Because I agree, some of these just don't make sense, and it would be nice to have, I mean, I'd have to go through each resolution to look at the year.
Well, it's on there. When it says R21, that's 2021. R23 is 2023. So, I mean, I don't know, this is alarming to me. I mean, I've had conversations with Mary Jo, and I was not expecting this. I was not expecting that out of $255 million that we started allocating in 2021, that only 98 million of that would have been actually spent at this point, when we have less than a year now. And it takes a process to say, okay, we're getting this money back. Now where do you start application processes and all these interviews? I mean, it's not just, oh, let's figure it out in a week or two. It's months.
yeah, and the two of probably your biggest, and they're broken up, is remember the 50 million for affordable housing and 30 million for homelessness, or do I have them reversed?
That's opposite, but yeah.
50 million for homelessness, 30 million affordable housing. Of that, that's where some of the largest amounts that you see, because a lot of that has been, the money was awarded, and then the detailed planning, and then going out for bid on contracts and all of that is what's been happening. Again, I'm not saying it's not alarming, but the amounts on this spreadsheet that you'll see, the largest amounts unspent fall within probably those two.
Can we get a report from them as well? Because, I mean, I'm seeing issues ongoing when it comes to homelessness, and I'm not on that committee anymore. You're on that committee now, and I don't know where they're at with the spending.
Yeah.
They have money left, but that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, to your point, that's going to be an ongoing need,
Right.
and so how do we sort of mitigate that? I just don't want to be in a situation where it's like, oh, here we are in September, and we still have, you know, tens of millions of dollars, if not $100 million to go, okay, well, what are we gonna do? And, cause I personally do not think that the most responsible way to handle this is to say, well, let's just create a $125 million thing to public safety salaries so that then we have the ability to spend it however we want to outside of the guidelines that it was spent for. Like, I understand having a little bit there because it's necessary. I understood what we did last time, but on a larger scale, that's irresponsible.
Right, no, it wouldn't, well, and
I think.
I didn't mean to imply that that's how it would be handled. I just meant we're gonna
It's
have
an
to.
option, right.
Well, or that whatever was left would be, it would, well, for this committee to decide, it would only be available for the original intended use.
Maybe.
If it doesn't get spent, it goes to general. I mean, there are ways to, you could come back and do new uses, but a little bit to what you're saying is, I don't know that I would recommend that.
Yeah, I don't.
And we need to talk, and it'd be way better to talk in details when we get to some of those numbers and some of that, you know, so that we're talking in real terms.
Right.
But, no, I said we might have to do something similar to what we did with CARES Act in the sense that we're going to have to create something from a legislative perspective that allows for us to completely spend the funds so that we're not returning any to the federal government. So we need to put something in place to protect Metro against returning any funds back to the feds. Then how we handle that internally, you know, we have some flexibility as to how we do that. But I was not implying that we would do any kind
And
of
we could go through the process again.
and that we would do any kind of reserve, that those funds would only ever be intended for the original use.
Right. My point is, though, we can't just wait for months. We need to figure this out, like, right now, because we know what that process is to say, okay, whatever, I'm gonna say MDHA because I don't have anything else in my brain. Okay, MDHA, $15 million, you've spent zero of it, we don't think, no, we're pulling that back. Okay, now what do we do with it? It's a long process of what are our priorities
Yes.
again, and who's gonna do what, and
Right.
you know, we need to figure this out now.
I can give a little background on MDHA at least. I pulled their wraparound services report. So MDHA cannot charge to the fund specifically, so they have to request draws. So every quarter we'll get draws from them. So with the wraparound services, I just pulled up their most recent report just to give a little background of why they haven't spent anything yet. And they actually created a new resident services department, and they plan to spend all of the funds by fall of 2024. So just to give a little comfort in that they are taking steps and they haven't
And they do
probably
submit
requested their
reports
first
regarding
draw.
timing of spending.
Yeah,
So they might have spent and they just haven't requested the funds yet.
that to me, I feel like, would be helpful for, you know, some of this is not necessary if they've spent the vast majority. There's some of it that I think is more alarming, and what is that cutoff, I don't know, but I would like to see, okay, here's this and here's why they haven't spent it, here's their plan. To me, would give me a more of a level of comfort, because just looking at this face value is alarming.
Okay.
It's definitely a bigger story that we can give you guys.
Yeah, and I know that numbers, I mean, I've been in accounting long enough to know that numbers don't necessarily reflect a story or the backstory, but still.
Yeah, we'll send the NPO reports and the department reports. Unless, if there's one that's like almost fully spent, we probably won't.
Yeah,
We won't clog you up with, you know, your inbox with all of those.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing then that you did, that I find alarming, to use your words, is the U.S. Treasury's definition of obligation. So if you recall, we had this interim rule, and then this interim rule was like the temporary interim rule, and then it was this, and then now it's the final interim rule, but it's still called final interim. And one of the things that they did is they essentially changed, they didn't change the definition, they continued to clarify what their definition of obligation is. And the issue it's causing for Metro is they are no longer recognizing legislation as documentation of obligation. So where we have a contract, no problem. That is a contract, and so it's an obligation. Where we have what I'll call exposure, and again, thank you to Wade for going through this. She essentially took this sheet of all of the obligations and added columns to the right that says, okay, is there a contract affiliated with this? So first we have all of the contracts with the nonprofits. Those are absolutely, those were what I'll call direct contracts. But then in the case of, we awarded some funds to Office of Family Safety. Well, they used some of those funds to hire case managers internally, and they used some of those funds to contract services with nonprofits. So I'll call it like a subcontract. So this committee didn't award the contract, but they awarded the funds knowing they would be subcontracted. Okay, so those are contracts. So in that example, the piece that is vulnerable are the internal costs. And if those internal costs are going past 12/31/24, there's no proof of obligation. We had originally been told, and we actually bounced this off third-party legal counsel, to say, is the resolution that awards OFS proof of obligation? And the original thought was yes. This clarification that the feds have put out now says no.
But don't we have an additional contract because we aren't able to disperse funds? Don't they have a contract with procurement? All of the organizations, whether they are using funds internally or subcontract, they have to have a contract.
Well, think about when we hire case managers, so when we hire an employee, there's no contract with that employee.
So if it's a metro department is where we're running into those
HR
issues.
doesn't have contracts.
You can't have you don't have a contract with yourself. So if it's an internal contract, it's like,
I don't
that
have
doesn't
an
make any
I get it
sense.
now, but
So
it's
what
a
was the
metro
idea?
department.
Was it an MOU that when you and I talked about it,
But we can't do MOUs
and you
with
can't do an MOU?
ourselves.
What was the idea that we had that you thought might work when we talked?
We can only do MOUs currently, we don't have a contract with MDHA for that 15 million. We can do an MOU with MDHA or a contract of sorts because they're a separate legal entity, but we can't enter into contracts with ourselves.
Right.
You'd asked about doing different
Contracting
MOUs.
parties.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I was just thinking through, who are the contracting parties? I mean, obviously, MDHA on one side, but on the other side, it's essential, if it's this committee or council, it's essentially Metro contracting with itself.
So
Right.
what has Metro Legal suggested?
So we do not have a solution at this point. There is still some, I'll say, efforts to get the Treasury to change that definition, or not allowing legislation. What all of the larger cities have done that have revenue replacement, if they've just said, then we're not spending the money on that, we're spending it on this, and then they're allowing that budget savings to be used to continue the work.
So then we would essentially have to have, for our purposes, a piece of legislation that would move the money into salaries or whatever the deal is,
Same as CARES.
but with an attachment, hopefully saying, but 15 million or whatever goes to Office of Family Services and
Yeah.
Office of this and Office of that.
Line items of how it's
So
spent.
when we looked at this, of the 255 million allocated, and then less what's already been spent, we have about 7 million, 6.9 million, that is being spent, what I'd say internally, either through an employee or I need some supplies, there's, it might be, for whatever
It's not a huge number.
Right, it's not a huge number. So that was, again, thank you to Wade for going through each resolution very specifically to say, okay, well, it was 15 million, but technically, they subcontracted the vast majority of that. And so it doesn't change, kind of the first part that we were talking about is those contracts still have to be spent by 12/31/26. I mean, that is the last
Right.
date they can spend them. But as long as something is under a third-party contract, or like in the case like with MDHA, we could enter a contract with them or an MOU, that would, that all works. There's going to be a small amount, and that's 7 million today. If a lot of that is spent, here's one example that had not been on my radar. We awarded some funds to Metro Action Commission for improvements to be made at some of the childcare centers. That's being done by General Services, so that's internal. So there's not a contract. If we hired ABC contractor out on the market and said, here's $2 million, we need you to go do all these projects at these centers, we would have a contract.
Right.
So we just need to tell General Services, you have to get that work done.
Right.
You have to get that work done by 12/31/24. Because we don't have a different, like, our current proof of obligation was the resolution, and the feds aren't accepting that anymore. Or we need to say, hey, MAC, go ahead and contract that with a general
Contract
contractor
that.
instead of General Services.
Well, and for something like that, understanding construction anyway, have we had those conversations, especially when it's around construction? Have we had those conversations of like, look, we're either gonna have to contract out with somebody else to do it, which is gonna cost us
Right, you're not gonna get as
presumably
much.
more,
Yep.
or you have to get it done by 24, can you do it? But
Yeah.
tell them that now, because
Right.
construction takes a while.
Well, that piece of the work we just looked at, so yes, so some of these are fresh to us.
Yeah.
Some of it's not, because we've been tracking with the departments each quarter, but still wading through this definition of obligation, so.
Do we have any idea of when they may make a decision on, yes, we're gonna revise our final revised idiotic thing that they've done that makes no sense?
All of the
Or-
kind of response back was due before the end of the year. I think it was the 21st, December 21st or something like that. So we don't have a definitive date that we'll hear back from them. So we're just gonna keep working. What we think is important right now is to go through with the departments that have these funds and determine of these internal, like truly non-contract spends, when do you think you're gonna have that spent? Because we're gonna have to make some alternate plan. And we need to have those conversations now because of things like construction. So that was a little bit of a hurdle we weren't expecting to have to get over. And it may look, again, similar to, if that's, let's just say that's 7 million, it's not gonna be 7 million by the time we get near the end of the calendar year, but let's just say it's 7 million. There will have to be some kind of resolution that says, we've just spent $7 million on this, and then those funds need to, it will probably look something like in our world, like a supplemental then to those departments, where we have to give them the authority to spend that, because they won't have it from ARP funds anymore. We have to give them the authority to spend it through the general operating budget, through probably a supplemental. So, thinking through that. Any questions?
I'm confused.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't understand how supplementals work, but it seems like the issue is, you can't resolve obligation legislatively, is my understanding of it. So just because you pass a resolution saying you're gonna spend the money doing X, that doesn't qualify for it to constitute it being obligated. So then how do you come back on the back end and through legislation say, okay, we've got 7 million left, we gotta do something with this? How can you fix a problem with legislation that on the front end, you can't, just because you pass a resolution, you're not obligating it?
So
Sorry. So we allocated
it will
20 million,
be
we've only spent
after the
7
fact
million, so
Okay.
what's
spend.
left?
So it will basically be saying, we're almost like publicly, because we've tried to be transparent with every penny we spent
Yeah.
on these funds, what we'd be doing is coming back, just from a transparency perspective, to say, over the last 12 months for calendar 24, or if Metro wants to put it on our fiscal year, for fiscal year 24, we spent $7 million on health department salaries. We've done it in the past. We wouldn't be saying we're going to spend the 7 million because it's gotta have taken place. So it would be kind of a transparent recognition of what we spent the ARP funds on. Does that, I don't know if that
I think so.
clarifies
So
it.
if you tell the feds we've actually spent the money, then there's no question of obligation.
Right, that's what we're saying is we've spent it, not we're going to spend it. Because at 12/31/24, we thought the legislation that we passed represented an obligation to spend in the future. What they're saying is that does not provide the proper documentation for future spend. So we would have to say, well, then guess what, we've already spent it.
Gotcha,
And that's what and then we tell them what we spent it on.
gotcha.
And because we have revenue replacement, that's why we're allowed to say that's what we spent it on, something already existing in our budget. If we didn't have, so one of the calculations we had to go through was lost revenue. And so as we went through that on an annual basis, the number ended up being 253 of our 200, or I think 252 of our 259. We were just a little bit short. But that's what's always helped us from a safety net of saying everything that we are allocating based on the eligible expenditures, but we've actually been reporting it to Treasury as lost revenue, as government services that we're providing using our lost revenue.
I have one other question.
Yep.
Could you walk me through R 221356, which is the,
It's at the top of the third page.
Okay, so that is our small business relief fund. That was $20 million that was awarded.
Yes.
18 million was directly to Pathway lending, and that 18 million was split between 9 million in grants and 9 million in loans.
okay,
The other 2 million was allocated to nonprofit partners that would help with marketing and outreach and some technical assistance to make sure that we really wanted to make sure that small businesses in some of our communities were aware of the program, and if they didn't have financials in good shape in order to apply for, they would provide the technical assistance for that. So that's what that 2 million is. So what you see in the line items, I'll go to the second line item, which is the 18 million showing spent. That's to Pathway. I didn't look at it today. I didn't look at they're very diligent in sending reports each month. I think they have roughly 2 million, I'll say ish, left in the loan fund.
okay.
But this is an example where we made the payments of all 18 million now, like it was in, it was split out into installments, but all 18 million has been paid to Pathway. We know they do still have roughly 2 million
In loans,
In-
they expended all of the grants,
Yeah.
the 9 million grants. they
to
have about
distribute
2
in
million
loans. Then of the 2 million to go to nonprofits, 1.7 million was paid to the nonprofits already. And we do know those have all been expended because their contracts all expired. And there's a little bit left, and actually we're gonna talk about that later.
I think what was looking confusing,
Was the negative?
was because it looks like it's separate, but really it's sort of like a subcategory of the small business fund, even though it's got its own account number and all that. It's because it says $0 basically allocated to 18 million spent. So then there's a negative 18 million. So she's like, what? What
Yeah.
is that? And so visually, it would be a subcategory of that, and who was sort of facilitating that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
And can we get a copy of their latest report as well, because they do have numbers as to
Pathways?
how many businesses,
Yeah, that'll be in the
women-owned,
NPOs, but
minority, they have it all broken down.
So a lot more to come on obligation, but just, that's the kind of thing that we're having to work through. And that's why we're really gonna be pressing anybody who has internal funds that we think, or that we were originally led to believe would be spent by now. It's now critical that they are spent by the end of the year. And we aren't gonna wait until September, October to say, hey, you know, because if they're not going to spend them, we hope that we have an answer by then. We will have an answer by then from the Treasury. We hope it's in our favor. If it's not, that's where this committee will kind of have to come up with what are we comfortable as that kind of that language that then spends the money so that we check that box with Treasury, but then internally, we want to make sure that those make sure that those departments can re-access funds to continue that work. They'll end up being general fund, but. Okay, so let's talk about some of the, now these are nonprofit contracts that you all approved specifically. And I'll just use, I'm gonna go back to Office of Family Safety as an example. That was where this committee approved funding to Office of Family Safety, and they did contracts with the nonprofits that were mentioned in their presentation. Actually, our 3 council members, you'll see specifically, they're asking for extensions on those. Those contracts didn't come back through to this committee because they weren't awarded by the committee. But any contract that needs an extension goes through council. So there's still transparency on all of those contracts. But for example, those with Office of Family Safety that were not awarded by this committee aren't coming back to the committee. These are the ones that the committee specifically awarded. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So those subcontractors asking for extensions don't have to come back to us or the council.
They do have to go to the
So
council.
they do have to go to the council.
Yeah, any
okay.
contract that
Okay.
extends its date, or, you know, in this
Okay.
case, it's all extending
Even
date,
though
we're
it's
not
a
adding money.
subcontract, and then they don't actually have a contract with us, they have a contract with the Office of Family Safety, which
Correct.
is the organization that's subcontracting them.
Yeah,
Okay,
the way of looking at a subcontract.
yeah.
It's not technically a subcontract.
So as the council, we would just be.
Council members will see that, but committee members
We would have
won't.
to recommend approval or disapproval of that extension, and then it would go to the
Yep.
council. Okay, gotcha.
But I knew that one was gonna hit the council, but knew we were gonna meet first, so they'll end up being treated really pretty much the same. There's just they don't have to come back to the committee, so. And we have folks here from Turk, so I'm actually gonna do theirs first. Just so that y'all don't have to stay. You're welcome to stay. So I've put the changes in the contracts into kind of 3 categories. Either just an extension of time, whereas most folks, they have their, the funds awarded, and they're not asking for more funds, they just want more time to spend it. And I actually suspect that we'll have more than a handful more come back, because that's the most common circumstances just been, it was slower to get off the ground than they expected. And, you know, for most of our partners, some of it was new work, some of it was, you know, scaling up work they were doing, but a lot of it was, we had to hire somebody, it's a new program, we had to get through, you know, some of the.
Urban League is an example of that.
Yep.
It was a new program.
Yep, so we'll have some other folks coming for extension of time. And what we talked about initially is that we only wanted to extend contracts through the end of September 30th of 2024. Because of this whole re-obligation, what I will say now is hindsight, if we have a, you know, 100% confidence that they are going to spend the dollars, we may not have to limit the contract to 9/30/24, because if we know that extending more time, they will spend it and they are hitting program goals, and I'll give you some examples of those, then spending to 12/31/24 or spending into 2025 is not a problem. We're allowed to spend it to then. I think what the committee just has to be comfortable with is that they actually are going to spend the money, and be able to hit the program goals. So that's extensions of time. We have one that is a change in grant spending. That's also very common, but this one's a little bit different, which is why I'm bringing it back to the committee. For scope of work changes, we have Turk here, and I will, did you, I thought,
I printed out these.
Okay,
Yeah,
I thought so.
If you don't mind just passing these away. And then you.
and so this is what they submitted to us. And again, this is the kind of thing that we've been in, I'll say constant, it's not like it's every week, but really constant communication with a lot of the nonprofit partners that are saying, hey, I'm having, this obstacle, can I change this line item to this line item in my spending plan? But this was one with scope of work. And because scope of work is in the contract, when there's a significant change in the scope of work, that's essentially a contract amendment and would have to go back to the council for approval. So we would bring it to you all as committee members first. And so I don't know who wants to speak, but if you all just, since you are here, go ahead and explain the change. It's not really as much of a change in scope. It is a change in scope of work, but the numbers are a reduction.
Yeah.
But because essentially who they're serving, they've been able to go deeper, just not as many. So I'll let you take it from there.
Lisa Sherman-Luna, Executive Director of Turk. And so grateful for this funding. It's been an incredible resource to the community. I have with me our sort of new legal director, Spring Miller, and then our sub-recipient, Tessa from Tennessee Justice for Our Neighbors. But yeah, for us, it was, I'll say a couple things. One, it was a significant scale of the legal services that we were able to, that we had been providing for a long time. And we saw the ARP funding as an opportunity to really test out delivering legal services to a much larger scale. We ran into a couple of challenges. One was hiring. It was really, really hard, especially if y'all remember, how long ago was it? That was like the peak of the difficulty in hiring. And so it took us a long time to bring staff on and then to onboard them. JFON had, I think, a much easier time because they had had like a natural pipeline with a lot of fellows and interns who were graduating from law school and then quickly came in. But we actually had to go out and find people, bring them in, and then also train them up. And as an organization that's often trying to develop leaders from within the community, it actually takes longer, right? And so that was one. And then the second one, which Spring can probably explain a little bit better, we were overly ambitious in legal consultations, which is us being able to screen someone for like what are the possibility of immigration relief options. And then our idea was that we would refer them out. Those can take about 2 hours, right? But as we were starting to refer people out, we realized there is not enough services to serve all these people we're referring out, and actually started to create some tension with other legal partners of like, we're processing these numbers, but then there's nobody to actually help them. And so we started going a little deeper with some of the clients, and that takes a lot longer. So we had to scale down the number of people we were processing on legal screenings and go deeper with the individual clients we were serving. And I'll let maybe Spring elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, just to sort of give some concrete examples, a legal screening of an individual could take, maybe 1 to 2 hours of staff time. But to actually, if in that screening we identify that they are eligible to naturalize, to become a U.S. citizen, providing the assistance to them to ensure that they actually do naturalize, become a citizen, could take 25 hours of staff time. And so instead, we sort of shifted our strategy. It was to make sure that we were actually securing relief for as many of the people that we were screening and identifying as eligible for relief as possible. And so you can see that in terms of staff hours, 1 to 2 hours on a consultation is very different from 25 hours on a naturalization case. That's just sort of one example. some kinds of relief take even longer than 25 hours. And I will also say, they also take a long time over time, the lifespan of that case, once you commit to representing a client and enter an appearance, tell immigration agencies that you are their legal representative, you have an obligation to that client for the duration of the case. And some of those cases can last for years and years. So anyway, so we're looking at all those factors and decided that we wanted to sort of make sure that as many of the folks that were coming before us eligible for relief could actually secure that relief. And so we're looking to do fewer consultations, but more extended representation cases. That's the biggest change, and there are a few others mentioned as well, but that's the biggest shift.
That's the biggest shift that you'll see from the 1,200 number to 600. And it's not, so, as they said, it's not just a cut in the numbers, but it's an expansion of the service for the
Exactly.
600 that do come through. Any
That's great, because you'll have more citizens.
That's
in
right.
Nashville.
I can't find, I see resolution 1560 that allocated almost 2.1 million and they've spent 1.1.5, but I don't see 1831 anywhere in the spreadsheet.
So if there were amendments that added to a resolution, our budget department just added to the original resolution. So you should see
So the
their
total amount between
number.
the two.
Yep. So
Okay.
it'll just be like the lump sum.
And just as a refresher, the reason there was an ad, if you remember, they were first approved when we only had the first tranche, and we just didn't have enough to fulfill the request, so it was like 13% short. And then we went back when we got the second tranche and added the 13.
So that was the 1831. Okay. Okay, so really the change is you're just scaling back on the deliverables and everything. Less sessions, less people, less whatever.
I wouldn't say in all the deliverables. These are,
And what you're asking to
in those-
change.
Well, it's fewer deliverables, but deeper deliverables, I would say.
Right, but number of people, I understand, and I'm not saying that
Yeah, yeah.
ugly, I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
saying, like, we're saying we're gonna do this, and now we're doing this, whether you're going deeper or not, but that's where we're at. Okay, yep,
Fewer people, but greater outcomes
got it.
for the ones certain.
For the individuals themselves, yes, got it.
Any other questions? So what we would do is essentially make this the exhibit to a resolution that would change the scope of work, and we would bring that through.
And this is just for our deliverables. JFond, JFond's on track for their deliverables, so we're not concerned about them. And we've actually been able to take some of the money that had been allocated to us that we weren't able to spend and actually subgranted it or subcontracted it to, I don't remember all the terms, to JFond, so that they could take on more. They're doing even deeper cases that take even longer time.
And it just to echo what Lisa was saying, bringing folks on board really does it is a very big challenge. She's correct that because we've had our law office, we've been able to take advantage of fellows and law students, but for one of our attorneys, we had to go as far as Washington State, who has been doing this work for a while in order to bring in somebody to do it, to continue with us.
I will say it is desperately needed. Like, Nashville needs to expand its immigration legal services as a whole. There's so many people here who need immigration legal services and are coming every single day, needing immigration, as Sandra knows, needing immigration legal services, but we just don't have.
And there's a waiting list.
We're on the waiting list, yeah.
Well, we're glad we can at least be helping with this initial approach. Any other questions? Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Motion to approve? Okay. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
We need a sponsor. Do you want to do that this time?
We do need a
I'll
sponsor.
be the sponsor.
Okay, thank you.
Is that all
Okay.
you need from us?
That is all we
Amazing.
need. Thank you for coming down today. At least it's not like in the pouring rain anymore. You actually have sunshine.
Tara, you could.
Don't take it.
Not going
Don't take it. Thank you for bringing it, just don't take it.
Thank y'all so much.
weekend.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stay warm, everyone.
Yes.
Councilmember Gamble, do you want to be on there as well?
Yeah, sure, thank you.
Okay. And then I'll stay on this one with the work changes. That was probably the most significant. YWCA, is that the one that you have? Okay, so YWCA had really slight changes. The award that they were given is spending for improvements made to the Weaver Domestic Violence Center. And they had originally, I think, said like exterior infrastructure, and they wanted to change it to interior and exterior infrastructure. You're better. What was the other one?
Oh yeah, no, it's mostly just out interior as well.
That was
So
one, and then
if you go to the fourth bullet point, that's kind of the newer additions to the exhibit. So it's really nitpicky, but we just want to make sure that
it was
they're-
really small, but they submitted it, and we thought we don't want to necessarily always be making the internal judgment. So we had the committee meeting. We thought we'd bring it to you, but their requested change again is in the very first line item where it says interior and exterior infrastructure, and then starting with bullet point 4, they just clarified what some of that interior is, about replacing some flooring, some bathroom fixtures, some HVAC.
What's the resolution number?
This was originally, I know Wade will beat me to
What,
this.
1863?
2022-1904.
They have not
below it.
spent,
So that's not the birds?
1904, you said?
Oh, this one. Okay, got it.
Okay, where is it? Oh, I see it. I see
So
it. I
they
see it.
got $1 million.
So they've spent half.
They've received $1 million. So they haven't spent $1 million yet, but we had their payment plan set up in 2 tranches. So they received the first tranche.
they received the first half, and they've been spending against that. They have not spent very much of it.
No.
I think very
They also
little.
requested an extension,
On the spending?
but it just depends on if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, sorry, that's a good point to do it together. They also requested a date extension.
Did they say why they needed it, just for the contracting and?
I'm gonna let Wade answer, because.
Yeah, they've had, I believe, supply chain issues. So that was the big problem they were experiencing.
Can I get copies of these so that I will be able to just reference when I'm drafting? Thank you very much.
Oh, I thought you meant of the resolutions, you've got.
Oh, no, I can
Sorry.
get it. Yeah, no, you're good.
So they've had to start working with an architect and contractor, so I think it's just the planning phases that have kind of taken a little bit longer. They had to have an RFP as well, so they've started the renovation, but they've only just now begun spending.
They just started the spending.
So they expect to spend it in time?
Oh, they
And
have a lot of repairs that they need to do. Is it clear that we're not extending any contracts past September?
We haven't, but I do want this committee, like in this case, and it's hard to pick, I'm not trying to pick some over others, but to me, this is an example of, if you extended this contract to June 30 of 2025, there's no exposure to Metro of that, because we're allowed to spend until then, and like you said, the laundry list of things that they need to do at the center, $2 million will get spent. Like, I don't think as a committee we have any concern that they're gonna come back and say, you know what, we did all the projects and we have 500 left, 500,000 left. I mean, it's not gonna happen.
In fact, with the cost of construction, they'll probably be.
Yeah, they might not
They're
get
gonna
to
be short,
everything, but they will
they're gonna spend money.
absolutely spend every penny. I mean, some of our construction projects, I just think we know. I mean, you said the same thing. We just know it's not getting cheaper. So we have not yet, I will say, kind of broken that barrier of the 9/30/24 mark.
Okay.
But if this committee
So for
wants
construction, we can
to,
go past
this
that.
might be one, and we're gonna talk about another one that we might want to. I don't think there's
That makes sense.
risk.
Yeah.
I very much look at what is the risk to Metro. That's what I've got to tell you guys if I think that's a bad idea, or if there's no risk, I don't see a risk of extending that. So I think they only asked to September because
Yes.
that's all that we were kind of offering. But I do think if this committee wants to say, let's just give them to 12/31 so they don't come back, or let's give,
Yeah.
2025 might be good.
Yeah.
June 3rd, 2025.
then I think this is one of those places to do it.
You're suggesting June 9/30/2025?
So they hope to spend it by 9/30/24, but their vendors are really saying February 2025, so
Oh, I
it's
didn't know
really
that.
just,
Then I would say,
it's a safer bet
June.
is.
I would say we do June 30th.
Yeah. Now, does that have to go back to council?
Mhm. All of these are going to council.
Okay, gotcha.
So I move that we extend their timeline of obligation to June 30, 2025,
And the modifications.
and approve the modifications to the interior exterior.
Second.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Excellent.
I'll be excited.
Yes, they'll be happy to hear that.
yeah.
Corner to Corner and Hispanic Chamber.
Gamble,
Okay, thank
And I'm
you.
happy to sign on as well.
Me too.
Thank you guys for remembering that. Corner to Corner and Hispanic Chamber are part of what I had just kind of mentioned earlier about the Nashville Small Business Relief Fund. And if you remember, you all don't actually have to do anything because in April, you all awarded them new contracts. What had happened is those contracts expired March 31st for marketing outreach, and Corner to Corner was also doing technical assistance. And at the time, LaTanya Channel was our Director of Economic and Community Development. She came in, said we wanted to do additional work with those two organizations, and you all approved $75,000 for the Hispanic Chamber and $150,000 for Corner to Corner, but those contracts never got executed.
Why not?
During the transition of her
Change
leaving,
in administration?
probably, yeah,
I don't know.
probably.
So,
Okay.
Jamari now is on board as our ECD. I brought him up to speed on those contracts. There will be a slight change in scope because it's not going to be specifically driving people to Pathway for those grants and loans because they already have a pipeline to fill all of the remaining loan funds. Of course, the grant funds are gone. But Jamari is gonna work with them to develop a new scope of work. That scope of work and those contracts will go through to council. I just don't think this committee needs to necessarily reapprove that because you've already approved the funding. And Jamari was very excited to be able to do some, additional work. And it's what they do. It's still all small business. And in fact, he mentioned a lot of it might be related to getting some of these small businesses in line with some of the East Bank opportunities and ways to get these small businesses.
Would be great with that.
Yep, so that's gonna be going to council. Again, transparency. I want this council or this committee to know, you guys already approved the funds, there was just a delay in the contracts, and now those contracts are being worked on with the new ECD, and once they're prepared, they will make their way to council.
What's the timeline on that?
Well, we had also given them the September timeframe. But again, if this committee is comfortable with saying, why don't we make them FY, 25 contracts, or if we want them to go through 12/31, so they have this 12-month period now. I know Jamari started working on them, right? Well, in fact, we were talking about it, and then we walked out and did the tree lighting, so I can tell you what day that was now.
So what does he think as far as an extension, what does he feel comfortable with? Did he make that suggestion? Is it the end of the year? Is it June of next year, or?
June of next year, because if we don't,
Mayor
even
Jo,
though it's a
if it
small
never was-
amount.
If it never went through council, what are you relying on as the original expiration date?
There isn't, because the contract didn't
So
go.
so we're
The original-
creating an
Yeah.
expiration date right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep,
Has the actual contract been signed now?
No, there's not, I was just making sure I understand. So right now, you're basically reviewing from,
Jamari is working on the contract, and if this committee says before anything goes through, I wanna see it, we can do that. If you all wanna say, hey, the one thing we want Jamari to know is he can take till 12/31/24 because we're now extending these contracts to these dates.
I mean, I kind of want to see it beforehand, given that the East Bank is also being worked on by another committee, and making sure that things are lining up. I would like to see it.
Mary Jo, I can email him right now, as we were talking about it today.
What's that?
I can email him right now.
Okay.
Ask for that.
So those then you'll see those then.
I mean, will it
We'll
be
send those back.
it's gonna be different from what was
Yeah, because
talked
the
about
original
before.
scope of work was marketing, outreach, and technical assistance to push people to being able to access the grant and loan funds at Pathway. There's no point in making that the scope of work anymore. So the scope of work has to be different. So the contracts have already been awarded in dollar amount, but now I was asking Jamar, I was like, there's no point in us renewing these contracts.
For that scope.
So this came to my attention actually in October, that the contracts had never been executed, and then we were kind of in this in-between. Jamari wasn't on board yet, and so I reached out and said, hey, we will fulfill the contracts, but you guys are gonna have to come up with a different scope of work. And so Corner to Corner actually sent something, Hispanic Chamber hadn't yet, and about that time is when I was like, okay, but now, it's now November and Jamari's here, so when he and I started talking, then he was like, hey, I have some great ideas that I'd really like to put into the scope of work. So that's where that got left.
Yeah, but the whole reason that we allocated that money was in support of the small business fund and the accessibility of that. It was like, it's important to have the money, but it's also important to be able to reach the people and have them, be able to get to that money. And now that is zero part of what this is, we're basically saying, okay, here's these two organizations and here's this money, what are we gonna do with this money now? It's a totally different scope of work.
Right.
And I don't know that we would have allocated, had we known that wasn't gonna be needed, we wouldn't have originally allocated those dollars. So to me, the whole thing needs to come back to the committee.
And we can, and that's my point of bringing it up
it's not
today.
just I wanna review the contract, I think it needs to come back and we need to figure out, is this, because there's a lot of organizations out there that would say, well, hell, I'd like $75,000 or whatever it
Yeah.
is. So why are we singling these two out when they can't do what they were originally supposed to do for that
Right,
community?
no fault of their own, right.
No fault of their own,
Yeah,
but
but
it's
that
like,
was
well, wait, this is a whole new ballgame now.
And I did talk to Jamari a little bit about that, but point made, we can bring the whole thing back, and he knows that was a possibility. What I had said, though, is this is for the benefit of small businesses that needed this assistance specifically to, we walked through the geographic areas, this distressed census tracts, and how can we help these businesses? So he does know that that's the focus of the whole intention of the
That will
funds in the
change.
first part. So it's gotta be in line with that.
But was
But
it
I'll
just for the
Mark.
businesses, like this is the characteristics of those businesses we want to help, but focusing on the East Bank is a very, very different, like,
No, I think what he was thinking is, could we benefit some of these small businesses by getting them registered to participate in some of,
The East Bank construction activities. And I will say that the scope for them was just marketing and outreach. We had several organizations. We had Conexion America, we had NBIC, and they had different scopes of
Yeah.
work. These two had marketing and outreach for that specific
and Corner to
national
Corner also
business.
had technical assistance.
Okay, they had that's right, for the Nashville Business Recovery Fund, but to your point, now that the money, the other organizations and that work has been done and we're down to about 2 million of that money, so it was successful. How can we use that allocation with these organizations to your point, either provide assistance for small businesses in the population that they serve to be ready to apply for or participate in the construction projects.
And I don't wanna
Which
say
I
for
know-
sure that it
Yeah.
was all gonna go that way, that was just one of his ideas of how can we still benefit. The intent is still to benefit small businesses in how we first aligned, whether it was North Nashville, other distressed census tracts, that was the original intent of that small business fund.
and you already asked for the reports for the small business.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
So we'll have that, and I'll just let Jamari know that the contracts need to come through the committee before council. He already knew they had to go to council, so.
Well, I mean, I would even think before that, it's like, what are you thinking about? Because why go to trouble of coming up
Yeah.
with a contract and us go, well,
Not
no.
approved, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Okay. Then the we already did YWCA with date extension. The other date extension request is for United Way of Greater Nashville in, specifically in the terms of their support of childcare centers. Go ahead.
You guys wanna just vote to have those two matters come back before you, just so the agenda?
Yep, so moved.
Sure. So there's a motion to
Refer.
reapprove.
Re-refer back to the committee.
Okay.
Corner to corner in Hispanic chamber.
Yeah, sorry. What she said.
Sorry, Mary Jo.
No, you're good, thank you. So, United Way of Greater Nashville, they received the funding in support of some of the childcare centers that were already serving lower income families. And the funds were twofold. It was knowing that there were some real changes that needed to be made to the model, whether that was, I think some of the things they talked about is, can we get like group insurance that lowers the cost? Can we do other things that create savings for these, but also legislation that would allow for greater voucher amounts? There were other things that they needed from a legislative. So while all those bigger ideas were happening, the concern was these centers are gonna fold during this pandemic if we don't give them financial support. So the money was twofold. They still have, they still have 2.6 million. They requested to spend the money through 12/31/24. So they have funds left. Their contract is set to expire at June 30th. But 6 more months of spending, they would deplete the funds through additional financial support of the childcare centers.
So, do you have a question? You go ahead, because.
In this particular case in particular, I remember that they were gonna be adding childcare capacity because we had places.
Yes.
We were trying to help people to return to work and that kind of thing. So it would be helpful to be able to see like what communities they've been
And we
able
could,
to.
we'll share all the most recent reports. They have already increased the number of seats. And there were, I believe there were 10 existing childcare centers. They've increased the seats at all of those. They were also asked to find 2 new centers specifically with our Hispanic community. They did bring on those centers. That took them longer than they thought, so that's again some of why there are funds available past their original expectation, is because it was slower to identify. They were slower to bring on some of these centers. But that's one of the things what we've already asked them in conversation, that they have increased the seat licenses at all of the centers.
Great.
So, I went to a presentation by this group that has been doing this, and this is probably one of the more disappointing as far as, did we reach our goal? And some of it, so, for example, when we said, can we offer group insurance and stuff? Well, they realized that if you offer group insurance, that it messes you up for your state benefits. So that was sort of a catch-22, so that was a no-go, which to me should have probably been asked first before that is one of our deliverables. So to me, that was short-sighted. They're looking at a lot of things to like make it easier to apply for whatever that's a state thing that is a little bit out of your control, and maybe should have had a better strategy from a lobbying perspective to get some legislators on board to fix the system, because I agree that it's clunky and hard to understand and it takes a long time and all that. There's several barriers. But that again was a little bit shoot first, aim later. And so that was discouraging as well. yes, we've saved those centers from going under. The problem is that it's not sustainable. We had several of those groups say, well, we raised the wages for our teachers. Well, what happens in 2025 when the money goes away? Are you gonna have to fire them or lay them off because you don't have that money? These were one-time funds. And so what this money ended up doing, granted, I'm glad that they're still in business. My question is, what have we done from a sustainable perspective so that at the end of this period, we can say we're in a better financial situation? Because we're not. Those centers are not in a better situation. And in fact, it sort of has put them at a higher cliff to fall off of because they've hired more people that they can't otherwise pay for when the money runs out, or they've increased salaries that they can't sustain when the money runs out. And so it was very, very frustrating to me to sit through it, understanding what our goals were. And, you know, they were patting themselves on the back, and it's like, okay. But what happens next? So this was a disappointing allocation, in my opinion. We didn't move the needle anywhere at all. The United Way with childcare.
Okay.
We didn't move the needle at all. From a sustainable perspective, we didn't solve any problems. Zero problems did we solve. I wish that we could take some of this money and really try to figure out what is a sustainable source of revenue that's ongoing that could subsidize this. Because childcare is expensive. It's always going to be expensive. People are always going to need it. It's necessary. It's necessary. If you don't have childcare, you can't work. Well, that creates a whole host of problems. So what are we doing to look at it from a more holistic perspective? I understand I'm sort of going off on a tangent, but this was what these dollars were supposed to be. What are we getting out back? Are we in a better place after this money has been spent than we were before? We are not. What are we doing? You know, are we talking to state legislators to say, look, we've got these lottery funds. Lottery funds are specifically for higher education. A lot of those lottery funds are not necessarily benefiting those folks. The recipients aren't necessarily following through. They're either flunking out or they drop out or whatever. It's like, well, can we allocate some of those funds to early learning? Because that is people are always going to buy lottery tickets. You know, can we look at things like that that creates a sustainable solution? Because we haven't solved anything. So again, I'm not saying that I wish we didn't allocate it, because I know that we've had a lot of kids with no place to go. I get that. But when we sat here, when we first were discussing these ARP funds, $256 million, it was, when we look at our priorities, we want to spend this money so that there is a return on our investment in a sustainable way. How have we made a difference? And just subsidizing a business is not necessarily what I had anticipated. I wish we could have, that they could have looked at it more from a systematic solution, sustainable revenue source solution, that kind of thing. And it just flat out didn't happen.
I have to push back on that, because these ARP funds were also supposed to use to keep people sustained during the pandemic. With the grandchild in daycare, I know firsthand daycare is expensive, and there are daycare deserts. There are not enough centers. And so in addition to wanting to expand and create more centers, the money was also being used to sustain operators and parents who had lost jobs or whatever the case may be during the pandemic. And I think that goal has been met. Where we have fallen short is maybe the expansion piece of that. And again, the state, to your point, has a lot to do with that, because the vouchers that are provided for state daycares do not come close to covering the cost of the daycares. So a lot of this money was used for that case, in that case. And talking with United Way recently, they were suggesting that perhaps as well as scaling up and finding new centers, starting new centers was also, they were finding barriers in that, and they could speak more to the barriers in opening new centers. But what they were suggesting after the federal government cut off their supplemental APR money at the end of September of 2023, they were suggesting possibly using the remaining funds that they had to continue to supplement these operators who, once that state funding was cut off, would put them in would push them back even further.
Right, but that's
And
my
so-
point, is that all we're doing is pushing out the date of when, what are you gonna do?
But to the point,
We haven't found
this
sustainable.
is a national and issue.
100%.
that Not just Nashville can't solve by itself.
100%, but that's what I'm
So-
saying. That's
So
what most of the
to
money.
your point, there has to be a global national solution. I mean, you're saying in the meantime, to stop supplementing funding means that even less children would have access.
And I'm not saying don't
So-
don't do that. What I'm saying is we haven't solved any problem with the money.
Well, I think that there are specific cities who buy into this program, who have it allocated in their budget. And I think those are conversations that are being had, right? The administration is talking to different council members, the Women's Caucus, I think, is pushing for this to be a budget item. I think it's very hard, especially during a pandemic, to make sure that you don't lose more employees, right? Because when you're up against the wall, sometimes their solution is, let's pay them a little bit more so we retain our staff that we currently have. I don't necessarily have a problem with people getting paid more. I do agree that we have to look at this big picture. I agree with Councilmember Gamble that, you know, it means less kids have access to daycare. I'm glad that they opened up those 2 new centers, because we know that these are very vulnerable communities that don't have access. Trying to figure out where there is money that is being misspent, I think is something that we could definitely take a look at. I want to find a solution because I know that there are long waiting lists for all of these families right now. So if we could have a report as to what they've spent thus far, that we could take a look at as a committee to figure out, you know, where the holes are, what the gaps are, where we could redirect. This is something that we should be talking about, early childhood education. And I know that there was a second component where we were training people who were going to be taking care of children at home. Like, what's the report on that as well? How many people
That basically
That I
went
don't
away.
have. The Rafa Institute.
That
went
basically,
away?
didn't it? They
No,
didn't.
They couldn't do it through MDHA, but they've actually, they have a training course, and they've had more than, I think they've had all of their numbers come through.
It was a challenge to, there was something about it that I
It's
remember
the
it was like,
it's
that didn't work out quite the way they wanted it to.
So it's the income supplement that they haven't been able to, I don't wanna say give away, but this presentation was 2-part. You had United Way with the, what I'll call,
centers?
external centers, and then you had Rafa that was focused on in-home. And what Rafa's been able to do is identify either existing childcare providers or individuals who are interested in being childcare providers, and they're going through different training courses. What they haven't been able to do is actually provide income supplement, which was thought to be necessary to get folks kind of off the ground with their business, because one of the primary target audiences were individuals that were within MDHA, and
they
can't receive income supplement.
Daycares because of state regulation.
That happened several times, and I just want to
So they
clarify.
had them licensed though? They helped them with their
They're
licensing?
working on their licenses. There's, we might have to correct me on this, there's family, friends, and neighbors, which is not the same as the 3-star rating licenses. So you can be licensed as a family, friend, or neighbor, and you can be licensed as like a 3-star. And so these are all family, friend, and neighbor.
I think seeing the report, I didn't go to that meeting that you went to, but I mean, looking at the report, I think would be important.
And they'll both be at the Women's Caucus meeting on January 30th.
Well, and I just want to clarify, I don't have a problem with people making more money. I mean, I want everybody to be successful. That's not the point of what I was saying. And I'm not opposed to expanding, you know, and getting new centers and all that thing. My question has always, my goal has always been, are we in a better place in 2025, 2026, 2027 than we were? Have we solved problems? And we're not. Because we haven't solved the problem, which is we've got a lot of people that can't pay for childcare and they need it.
It's gonna take a lot more money than $6 million to solve.
100%, 100%.
Exactly.
100%. Right. So efforts, I feel like we should have spent more money, I think, on looking at those sustainable sources of revenue, because if we say, okay, we're gonna give you an extension from 9/30, 24, 20, we're at 24, 6, whatever it is, to the end of the year, let's say, well then what happens when that funding goes away, January the 1st, they can't sustain the people that they hired, they can't, because it's a subsidy.
But to
Where are you
Sandra's
gonna
point,
get?
though, that's, the goal is to put it in our budget. I mean, like we've done with other budget items where we started to.
That's a massive dollar amount.
Well, I mean,
That is a
we
massive
won't be able
dollar
to put
amount.
it all in our budget, but the goal is to find sustainability
And I'll
in
say
it.
this contract had essentially 3 goals. It was provide financial stability to the organizations, increase seat capacity, and find a better or improve the existing model. And I think what I hear you all, and I'm going to try to bring it together, is that we've probably met 2 of the 3 better than the third. You know, that we haven't, they haven't made as much progress in improving the business model. But
And I'm fearful.
they did
In
increase seat
January,
licenses, and you do have to look at, one of the goals was to keep these centers open. And so I'm not saying any of those 3 are more important than the other. When our team goes in and does a contract review, you know, they're gonna say, hey, they met these goals.
I think we triage, right?
Right.
Like, we figured out what the problem was and we stopped it from getting worse. That's where we're at. I think having the reports, looking at it, figuring out what the plan is going forward would be important. And didn't they have studies last time?
I'm sure.
With
other-
them?
They had a separate grant than this one that we're talking about, which was $160,000, I think, $150,000, which was more aimed at a study about what is the business model and how do we move forward. So
Like, I wanna see
have
that.
So they have that. So what this request is as the contract will expire on 6/30, they will have funds left over. And their request is to extend the contract to 12/31/24, at which point then there would be no funds left over. That 6 month, the primary spend in that 6 month is all the stabilization funds.
Can you confirm that's RS-21 ending in 16? There's 2 on here.
2022-1450.
1450, thank you.
So I'm sorry, if we could go back to the initial request, because I've forgotten
Yeah.
after the discussion.
The request is to extend the contract date from the existing contract expiration is 6/30/24. They want to extend it to 12/31/24. And they do know at that point then they will have 100% of the funds spent.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to do that.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. I have 5 in favor, 0 against.
Kimberly, you want to be the sponsor?
Thank you.
I could have my name on it too.
Sure. Okay. The last item related to contract. So one of the things that happens throughout the life of the contracts, especially, I will say, more so these that we've done with ARP, because they were 2 and 2.5 year contracts, they were some of the largest dollar amounts. And when the nonprofits submitted their grant spending plans, you know, they have now come back to us at times and requested changes. One of the changes was, hey, I'm not gonna hire this person in-house anymore. I've been struggling to get somebody hired, but so-and-so can do the work for us, so can I transfer $40,000 from comp and benefits to professional fees? And when they are making those kinds of requests that go from a previously approved line item to another previously approved line item, and didn't really change the work that they were doing. It was really just rather they hired in-house versus using somebody from professional fees. I have made those approvals, and so then they submit a new grant spending plan, and then we keep that grant spending plan. And that happens, we get people want to transfer between, well, I have this, you know, supplies, and I'm gonna put some into travel, because we're gonna go to a conference, and they wanted to transfer $1,000. Because the rule for Metro is if it's 10% more, then you have to have that approved. So if they only had $500 in for travel and now they want $750, like that exceeds it. So like they call. I don't bring all of those back to you all. They're minor and they don't change really what was discussed. But I have one that I thought was different, and I wanted to make sure and it doesn't necessarily need to go back to council either, because it's a shift in their line item of their grant spending plan. And in this case, it was FISC, and as you recall, the Entrepreneur Center renovations, it was a $10 million grant, and it was for the construction of the renovations of the building, and even then they knew they would have some excess that they wanted to use on technology. So whatever was left over for construction, they were gonna use on technology. They've come back and asked if they could carve out $500,000 of the $10 million to be allocated for the director of the center's comp and benefits for the time period to sustain the consistency of that person being with the center. I don't wanna say long-term, 500 doesn't get you forever, but.
Is there a term associated with that?
They thought that would at least be in the 2 to 3 year time frame of comp and benefits. So they wanted to carve out $500,000 in personnel costs, comp and benefits, and that had not been discussed at all in their presentation. So I thought that was a change that was slightly different, and wanted to bring it to the committee for your approval.
So they got their technologies fees covered? No?
They believe, it still provides them enough room for technology. They actually shared with us some of the details of their construction, and they had enough contingency fees and technology fees that they think that carving out this $500,000 is actually not going to take away from being able to have it fully up with technology. You know, like it covers the construction and the technology they need, and they could still carve out. I mean, they also continued, as they said, they continued to fundraise for additional amounts, but.
Because that was the initial, and that was my question. Does the legislation and/or the contract that we have with FISC only designate funding for capital and technical? So this would be adding, because if I recall, we had a discussion about that. So we would be adding personnel to
The grant spending plan.
To the grant spending plan. So would we need to do that in the resolution as well?
We don't really take changes in grant spending
Okay.
plans
We
historically
only have to do it
back
on
to
the contract.
council.
Okay.
So we don't change the contract for it.
Okay.
We literally approve them internally.
Okay.
And then when, again, whether it has anything to do with ARP or just Metro grant funds, when the Office of Financial Accountability goes through and does contract reviews, they just make sure they're looking at the most recent grant spending plan, and then that's what they review. I don't want to use the word audit, but to give you guys an idea, that's what they're doing, is they go back in, and on this line item, they'll say, give me all the invoices for this line item,
Okay.
or they'll sample that line item. And so what is in this contract right now is $10 million for it says capital, technology, and then it says non-personnel. And so we want it to be able to, we want them to be, if this committee wants them to be able to spend it on personnel, I felt like that was a very specific change in their grant spending plan. Different than shifting 40,000 from one line item, or sometimes 1,000 from supplies to, travel or
They don't have this
printing.
person in place yet, this is
They,
too.
they do, and I apologize, I don't have the name. And I don't know if it is a FISC employee who's been identified to run the center, but because the center's not open yet, they're not technically assigned to the center. But the way it was asked was, we want to make sure we can retain this person, because this person has already been so entrenched into the development of this center. We want to ensure that we have this person. So if it's funded, we won't risk
And if
losing this person.
I'm not mistaken, I think that person, they already have a small business training program or something in place. It's not this incubation center, but it's for some reason I recall that because they already have some type, and I can't think of the name of it, it has a name in place, that this person may be doing that and moving over into
Yeah.
the center. I don't
Yeah,
know.
the name was mentioned, I apologize.
I can't
I
think
know
of
it
the
was a
name of the
woman,
program.
I just can't remember what her name was, and it wasn't.
I just wanted to know if it was like to find somebody and that's why it's this amount, or if it's someone that's already there.
I think it's somebody who's there, and it's really important to them to make sure that for the continuity of going into the, when the center opens, that they want the continuity of having that person.
Do we know if this personnel could possibly be even for adding another person, or is this specifically for one person?
We would just be opening it to
So
personnel.
they could, personnel,
and it
so they
does-
could
it does
ideally
give some
use that to
flexibility.
hire somebody else as well, because they're gonna need more than one person. Okay.
Yeah, so it would, go
Would
ahead.
that change their contract then, their extension? They need an extension if they end in June 30th? If that's a 3-year
Yes,
salary?
yeah, I don't think they necessarily thought about that.
It's a 3-year salary or 2?
Well,
I have no idea.
They didn't specify, but Wade just made a really good point. We would actually have to extend, because if the funds are intended to use for 2 years for comp and benefits, their contract expires June 30 of '24. So we would have to get their
12/25.
contract, yeah. I mean, they still can only use the funds through 12/31/26. I remember making that comment. So that's why I said 2 to 3 years, because I don't know if they're already paying that person and they
And
want.
we don't know if they're gonna hire more than one person.
Right.
I mean, they wanna use that 500,000 for personnel.
Yes,
period.
but it would require an extension.
So,
With
but
the
so we would
expiration
have
date
to
also.
consider if we will approve the change in the line item for personnel and also
Would you also extend the date?
contract
And we
to-
could get the exact date through which they need, or,
I mean, can we just go through to the end?
yeah.
To 26, 12/31/26.
And if you wanted to, you could at least do it through 12/31/25 right now,
But
and then we can extend it.
can we do
necessary.
it specifically for, well, I guess the construction's still gonna be ongoing, right? Because if we extend it, it's not just for the salary,
Correct.
it's for the
They would use,
construction.
yeah. If construction wasn't finished, they could continue to use the funds for construction also.
Okay.
Which again, I would point out, I don't think there's a thought that between construction technology and now some comp and benefits, that they wouldn't use the funds by 12/31/25. I don't think there's any risk of any of that money coming back to Metro at a point when we, couldn't reobligate it.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'll make a motion.
So it sounds like the motion then is not only to
Change or add the line item.
add a
for
line item for
personnel,
500,000 of personnel,
and
but
extend
then
the contract.
extend the date of the contract through 12/31/25, which then will have to go to council.
Okay.
If we were just gonna do the grant spending plan, I was gonna leave it all up to you, but once we change a date, it goes to council.
And I think that's probably the best way anyway, just take it all to council.
Keep it all
Yeah,
transparent.
keep it all transparent.
Well, other than we're on camera. Okay,
You motion, second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
All right, Councilmember Gamble, do you want to be the sponsor, or anybody else?
I could be signed on.
Okay.
And the last item officially is just, you probably already have this, especially for Junad and for Vonda. You probably have in your inbox something about board and committee training. And you probably weren't sure if it necessarily applied to you, and it does. So I was asked to officially remind you, the date is February. And I don't know if a specific date was given to you. I'm a little bit fuzzy on this, but it's WebEx training. So it is, you can do it remotely, but it's live training, if that makes sense. So it's not like you can watch it 2 days later and then sign something and send it in. So if you can mark your calendar, if you need it resent, they actually told me, like, we'll just resend it to your whole committee after, just you give them the heads up. So if you don't have it, I will probably just ask them to resend it.
Yeah.
Please.
To the entire committee. But so again, I think it has a specific date. Anyway, it's February, it's via WebEx, so you don't have to come in person. You can attend it remotely, you just have to attend it at the actual time because it is a live instructor. And that's for all of our boards and committees
So
throughout
do we
Metro.
have to do that as
Helpful
well?
clarification.
I'm certain y'all do.
I don't remember seeing that. I know we have something.
But I don't
we
know
have
if
to
you
do.
all do a separate one.
I think it's a separate one.
So, I will get HR to resend that.
Who are we looking?
It may have come from Wanda Hadley. But I had already said, can you just resend it? And they said, yes, we'll resend it after your committee meeting, and you remind them so that
Okay, good.
they know what it is when it comes to them this time.
It's May the 18th. Nope, that was last time. We've already done this, apparently.
Yeah, it's annual.
Oh.
Yep, it's annual. So then our next steps, I'm throwing this out a little bit to you all, as should we meet again in February to review, we can send you everything, and we will send you everything. Do we want then to have a meeting time for questions and reviewing that?
I would prefer if we have it ahead of time, so if we
You
have
will.
any outstanding ones, we could ask those people to be at the meeting.
Absolutely.
So we could ask questions.
I don't see why we couldn't have it by end of next week.
Yeah, so I have internal program reports as of July 31st. So the next round would be January 31st. So it
that's-
just depends on, you guys would just get the July 31st.
That's a
Within
good
the week,
point.
yeah, I couldn't get that within the next week probably. 2 weeks,
Yeah.
I could ask.
Yeah, we could just set we could just tell them, we could move up.
Twice is enough.
We could move up the date a little bit, and then we could do a later in February.
Mhm.
February, do you all still prefer Wednesdays?
Yes, actually.
Because if we did February 21st, then we should have everything back.
Yeah.
Even, and we could move up the July 31st a little bit. And hopefully even by then, we might even have some information on obligation from Treasury. Does anybody know right now if the 21st is a bad date?
It looks good for me.
I'm good.
It's my birthday.
I was gonna
I'll
say,
find
when's your
coverage.
What day?
Happy birthday. The 21st? February 21st?
So would it be at 1 o'clock?
No, I think we'd go back to the 3 o'clock. I didn't think anybody I didn't think anybody wanted to meet Friday at 3 o'clock.
It was just Wednesday,
So-
whatever that first date.
Yeah.
But yeah, Wednesday at 3.
But we'll get back onto our Wednesday at 3 o'clock if that.
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay. Well, good.
Can
And
you send a
then,
calendar invite or something?
yes,
'Cause-
I'll send it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I'll for sure send it. And then, again, you've got this, if you continue to go through it, but we will just send you all of the nonprofit and all of the department reports. And I say all, we might have 95% of the departments. I don't know, Wade can tell me, do they all actually reply?
I'll make a reply.
Is there sub-grant reports as well? Like sub-grant reports? Like, is that included in the reporting?
Probably not.
Not necessarily.
Because I just think of some of the programs we had, and they were gonna have some organizations do outreach, and making sure that those organizations do.
Okay, we'll find out as much of that as we can, and that might be exactly what you're talking about as far as, for further questions. Because the templates that we have them fill out, are meant to apply to, the vast majority, but there might be something that's not specific enough. So that'd be a good catch. All right, well then we are officially adjourned. Thank you all. Stay warm. Have a good long weekend for anybody that gets to enjoy Monday.
Thank you. You too.
I think most people are gonna enjoy Monday. You better stay at home. It's gonna be nasty.
Yeah.